At least 18 MPs stood up in Parliament to debate the planned hike in the goods and services tax. Now, many expressed support to delay the GST hike. However, the Workers' Party says that it disagrees with the decision to raise the goods and services tax and will object to Singapore's budget 2022. The party believes that the government does not need to raise GST, especially at this time, and that there are other options for raising revenue. Brandon Tanoto with more.
The Workers' Party has consistently opposed the government's plan to raise GST from 7% to 9% since it was first announced in Budget 2018. Leader of the Opposition, Pritam Singh, calls the GST a regressive tax that hits lower-income earners harder. He adds that while the hike has been anticipated, it comes at a difficult time.
Inflation is on the upswing and prices are high. Supply chain disruptions are having an outsized impact on people's purses. There's real concern on the ground that the announcement to raise the GST will lead to price rises across the board. In fact, some price rises have already occurred, with speculation that these were in anticipation of a GST hike.
As such, the party has laid out some possible alternatives.
One alternative, but admittedly more complicated scheme for enhancing the progressivity of the GST is to consider GST where progressivity is built right in. This means the purchase of goods and services that the wealthy are much more likely to purchase, fancy cars, high-end property, first-class tickets and luxury experiences, be subject to a higher rate of taxation.
We have to consider if our GST can start allowing for exemptions on certain essential items, treatment that is often seen in the case of other economies. The list of items should be kept to essentials such as food supplies, healthcare and care services, including childcare.
Mr. Singh also calls on the government to lay out revenue and expenditure projections for the rest of the decade. He says this is so that the necessity of a GST hike can be considered and examined properly. Still, Mr. Singh welcomes the formation of a committee against profiteering. The committee will address concerns that some businesses could use GST as a cover to raise prices.
Other MPs expressed support for the government's decision to delay and spread out the GST hike. It comes even as many of them kept the issue of the rising cost of living in focus. Chloe Chu reports.
Grateful for the GST hike delay and the cash rebates given to households. That was the majority sentiment echoed by many MPs when voicing their residents' feedback in Parliament.
Tax increases are never popular. But many Singaporeans acknowledge our pressing and fast-growing needs. Just to name a few, it's not just increasing healthcare costs. It's not just paying for aging infrastructure. It's not just investing for future capabilities. But let's not also forget that there will be less Singaporeans working in the future to support more people.
But even as they accepted the urgency of raising revenue and lauded the support for lower-wage Singaporeans, some urged the government not to leave the middle income behind.
We could raise the salaries of our frontline workers, regardless of whether they are lower-wage workers. I'm mindful that it needs to be paid by some from somewhere. But this includes our wider range of healthcare workers and adult educators, who are private sector individuals working across the early childhood, student care, universities, private education institutions and international schools, and who are represented by the NTUC. The nature of the occupation meant that these adult educators, who are largely aged 35 and above, were one of the first to return to their workplaces as the pandemic dragged on.
Other discussions revolved around the merits of what was described as a unique system of taxes and transfers.
We have seen a steady decline in our Gini coefficient from 0.45 in 2010 to 0.38 in 2020 after transfers and taxes. In this budget, the assurance package designed to cushion GST impact for middle and low-income households was boosted to 6.6 billion. Another 9.5 billion over 5 years is being set aside to support the progressive wage model and workfare income supplement scheme, benefiting 94% of full-time low-income workers.
MPs add that raising taxes serves other purposes too, such as helping to achieve economic inclusion and to support a society that's growing.